Everybody, welcome back to The Suspense is Killing Me. My name's Lucas Marino. I'm your host. Matt Wildasin is with me today. Matt, how are
Hey,
you, man?
good. How are you doing?
Dude, I was telling you before we came on, I'm so hyped to talk to you because I've been reading Gore this week and I'll nerd out a little bit about the Backrooms cover. Um, and I've been listening to the Ghostwriters podcast, and it's just really cool for me to be able to meet with you today, find out a little bit about you as a writer, as a reader, as a fan of everything in this genre, and find out what's going on in your life, man. So thanks for taking the time to join me.
Hey, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, and we were talking about kids right beforehand. I mean, usually when I, start the show with people, I ask them, what's life for you like outside of writing? But when you have a little one like you do, I already like I know that's could be a loaded question. So.
My life outside of writing is consistent of poops, feeding, and just a lot of children's books
Yeah,
and
yeah.
Bluey, which is fine actually.
Oh, you're at Bluey stage right now.
Yes. Well, I mean, it's one of those things where we thought, what kids show can we put on that isn't going to drive us insane at the same time? And a lot of our friends that had just had kids were like, you should try Bluey out. And I went in negatively with it already because I was like, this is a kid's show. The title of this already sounds like I'm going to hate it. But then we started watching, I'm like, this isn't a kid's show. Like,
Yeah.
and it's really good. The stories are good, and the whole like dynamic they tried to portray with family is appropriately like put together. It's
Nice.
not like stepping on toes, being like that's not how you should parent, but it's like here's a good idea of how you could do this. And I've learned a lot, honestly,
From Bluey?
watching
Yeah.
Bluey. So
It's awesome. Hey, can't beat that. I mean, you can already thank your kid for contributing to your adult education.
oh yeah, I thank him for a lot.
Yeah. Well, I expect that you're probably in a similar situation to when I was when we had our first son in 2007.
Mhm.
And I mean, it's life altering,
It
like
is, yeah.
everyone tells you that, but I was like a crazy sailor at the time. And, coming home was always an exciting thing for me. But then coming home to a baby, I was like, this is awesome. Like it just
Yeah.
felt like it was so right. But we had Yo Gabba Gabba, dude.
Oh
Like,
God, yeah, Gabba Gabba. Yeah, I remember. Like I never sat down and watched these things, but I knew of their existence, and just seeing product merch and stuff enough, I'm just like, wow. Whew.
so I'm sitting next to my toddler and he's just jamming out to Yo Gabba Gabba. And I'm thinking, oh my God, this show was completely made for people that like spent years on psychedelic drugs. Like, this is not a kid show. I'm thinking, I'm glad he's enjoying this, but I'm so entertained right now. I wish
It'll be
I'd
one of
had
those.
this like 20 years ago, you know?
It'll be one of those things like, well, and I think he is older now, to the point where he if he goes back and watches any of it, he's like, oh my God.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Most definitely. Yeah, and then we had our second son, and he was into the Octonauts and
Okay, yeah, yeah.
yeah, like the typical thing. My daughter was all over the road. She just did whatever the boys were doing, plus like 50 more levels of aggression. She just like beating everyone up and like
Well, she
exerting.
was the only girl. She had to stake her claim. That's
Oh yeah,
yeah.
far and away the most aggressive of the three kids. We always joke around, and I tell her like she got all this Sicilian blood. Like it all went straight to her. My boys are so chill, which is not what most people tell me about their sons. They're usually like, dude, what do you do with boys? They're like climbing on the roof. They're doing all this crazy stuff. I'm like, yeah, my wife and I somehow managed to divert all that energy right to our daughter. So
Well, yeah, I mean, my son, yes, I can agree with the whole they're just climbing over everything because he learned crawling last month, and everything that he shouldn't be into, he's into, and we have like a million toys and things for him to interact with, and that stuff's just like it's like that thing. Like my son could be sitting there like, oh hey, I see this toy over here that you spent like $250 on it. It's got all this like learning stuff on it. It's electronic and everything. But I'd rather stick my face in the dog bowl over here. Just like, all right, bud.
that's the way it works, man.
Yeah.
That's the way it happens. So like how long were you writing before all of this excitement happened? Like have you
So
been
I've been writing. I think it was probably about 4 years before we had our
Hmm,
son. His name is Vander.
gotcha.
Um, and that was like I was very prolific in that time period. Like 4 years time, I put out I think it's like 11 books if I remember correctly.
Wow.
And I know there's more people more prolific than that, but to me, I was like, this is a lot of books.
That's a lot
Um,
of books.
he's here now, and if I get a paragraph in a day, I'm lucky sometimes because
Yeah.
it's all day, it's all night, and but I get it in when I can. That's basically the best you can do in that situation.
Well,
But
I commend you
I appreciate that.
because it is a lot. It's a big
Yeah,
difference.
getting Gore out was probably the hardest thing I ever done in my life. Like putting a book together, being a self-publisher with a child, with like a newborn. Yeah, that was so difficult. And it took
How
way longer than it did any other book we put out.
how long did it take for you to write and publish Gore?
So luckily for me, with Gore, I kind of had the idea that I'm like, this kid's coming. Like I have the 9 month countdown clock, nose of the grindstone. Let's just get this stuff done. That was
Right.
the plan. But you know, it's one of those things where you're not taught a lot about the stuff that's going to happen pre-child.
Right. Yep.
And there's like, your wife's going to get sick, she's not going to feel good, and there's going to be more things that you didn't think that you might have to pick up and help with than when she's not feeling this way.
Right.
And I wasn't thinking about that. I was just like, oh, I'm just going to write my ass off for 9 months. Well, I only got halfway through the book by the time he came he came out.
Nice.
So the rest of it was like, if he fell asleep, I would try and keep him on my chest, and I'd have my phone up in front of me, just using Word on my phone and
Yeah.
typing away as good as I could. Because if you ever had fat thumbs, typing on a phone is not really ideal.
Yeah.
And it was just, I just kept going as much as I could through that time period, and getting it finished with the writing side wasn't as difficult as I thought with a child. I got that part done. The editing part
Yeah.
was where the brakes really slammed on, because and we spoke a little bit about this before we went live about one of the tactics you use is you read out loud.
Right.
And I do the same thing. I read it out loud to myself because I'm like, if I hear something that sounds completely stupid, then obviously my reader is going to feel the same way.
Right.
So you can't really read out loud if your son takes a nap. And when they're just born, they nap a lot.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was one of the major hurdles. So I had to change up editing styles, and it took a lot longer. And then when you're doing it yourself, and I do everything myself, like the editing's me, the covers are me.
Well, I was going to ask, I thought, am I incorrect in assuming that your wife participated in part of the editing process?
Yeah, she helps me too with the editing.
Gotcha.
She'll do like an initial pass, then I read it, then we go through it. Like we do like 3 or 4 passes.
Nice.
And yeah, that was really hard to do. Like that
Yeah.
final pass took almost like a month to get through, just because of all that going on. But it initially got there. And the cover, now don't get me wrong, I love this cover for it, but I feel like if I had more time, I probably could have even done even better. But that's just me being the artist that's like behind the thing, like, oh, my work sucks. But I like threw that together in a weekend.
Really?
And then I hit publish on the book that Monday. It was just like, woo, it's done.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you already have that like impulse to hurry up and get the book out there when you're that far into the project, and it's like right there anyways, right? Just compound that with all the fun of having the little dude there to take care of and nurture, and the time constraints and everything. It's got to be compounded.
Yeah. Oh, and I, for your listeners, don't get me wrong, I'm not complaining about my son being around. I love him to death.
Right.
Yeah, it's just one of those things where I feel like child raising should be something that's taught in school as like not even an elective. It should just be a course. And it doesn't even have to be that in depth. It could just be like, here's the things you should expect. Here's the things that could go possibly wrong. And here's suggestions as to how to maybe right that ship and make your life a little bit easier. You know, it's just like, no, just you fit. It's going to happen. And child raising to me came to be one of those things where I found it was like one of the most lackadaisical things when it comes to finding information for it. Because you're like, my kid's doing this, and it's always like, it's fine.
They'll be all right.
Don't worry about that.
They'll be all right.
Like, my kid's head's like spun around 360 and he threw up pea soup all over the walls. Is that okay? That's fine. Just find a priest and some holy water. I'll clear that right up.
That's right. They made a movie about this. Why are you asking us?
Yeah.
Dude, that's crazy. Yeah, I feel for you, man. I was not writing when we had infants, and as you know, I have three kids, and I was in the military at the time, so my life was like ships travel,
Mm-hmm.
and I was able to stay focused because my wife was, you know, like, dude, just go.
Just go.
But then I'd come back, and it was like spend 100 days out at sea with like a bunch of crazy guys and some Marines, and then come home. And then there's like soft baby and like quiet times and like learning
that's a
the
juxtaposition right there. Oh
yeah, I mean, learning the feeding schedules and stuff. I remember the first night I was home from a patrol, and we had the baby, and he was in a crib in the room with us.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like he ate right around 2:00 every night, and I had just like knocked off at around 10 or 11 o'clock that night, and I just shot straight up, like out of my sleep, because one, I'm already disoriented because I don't know where the heck I'm at, because I've been in this room in this bed for 3-4 months, and then like add on top of that a baby crying, like I almost went right through the ceiling, man. I was like, what's happening?
You almost get like a spider sense with it, like
yeah.
The moment a sound happens, you're just like, what the hell's it?
Yeah,
what's happening?
It's pretty cool, man. So you had this experience with Gore, right? Like I can now I see, having read the book and having known where you were when you were writing the book, that must have been kind of surreal, because I mean, I guess we could go ahead and dive into a little bit about what inspired Gore, what it's about, so people understand why I'm talking like this about it, but couldn't be further from what you were experiencing in real life. So
well, yeah, obviously. So Gore was inspired basically just for my love of the Doom video game franchise, honestly.
Right.
It started, the idea for it started in my head when Doom Eternal dropped. That game was so amazing, and playing through it, I just like, I had this thought, and I'm like, you can make a really cool story out of this. Not like they didn't already, but I'm like, you could change a few things, and like you could make your own little Doom type story out of this. And then I immediately just was like, nah, that will never work. Because the rational side of my brain kicked in a little bit, because I'm like, well, what happens if, you know, like the Bethesda lawyer knocks on your door someday and they're like, hey, we read this book. And then I stopped myself, and I'm like, that's never going to fucking happen. They're not going to find this book.
If they do, it might be a good thing.
Pardon my French. Am I allowed to curse on here?
Oh yeah. No,
okay. Just
yeah.
make sure. But yeah, it was after I got myself to think like, it's fine, because it's interpretation, it's fandom, you know, like you're allowed to do that kind of stuff.
Right.
Then I was like, okay, I need to make this my own. What am I going to do? And the first thought was the setting in my mind, because I'm like, it's always on Phobos or Mars if the person that writes it doesn't understand the Doom franchise. And I was like, I want to put it somewhere else. They always do like Mars, so it always looks desert like, and I'm like, it would be cooler if also the element itself of the planet that it's in is dangerous. So I thought, well, why not like Europa? It's like a completely frozen over planet with like this deep sea in it. And I'm like, okay, that works. I'm stuck on that. We'll go with ice. That sounds cool. And then I went,
ice.
What's that?
Acidic ice.
Acidic ice. Yeah. Well, and that's like, and that was another, like, that idea just popped in my head because I'm like, I gotta have a little bit of lore as to like why the hell, or why would anybody be on this planet to begin with? Because you gotta have humans. I'm like, well, why the hell would anybody be on Europa? It's just a moon of Jupiter. Like,
Right.
why would you be there? So then it was the whole idea that Earth, by this time, I think it was 3035 in my book, like we went through all of our resources.
Right.
We mined and fracked everything we could. It's just gone. Like all the dinosaur goop's gone, So we found out that we could mine like certain acidic things, and they found like deposits of it that came from like meteors and stuff that were from Saturn, or not Saturn, Europa.
Jupiter.
So naturally they have a giant drilling machine that goes on Europa, and that they search for this stuff. And the captain of the vessel is a guy who this is kind of like his he's demoted down to doing traffic duty, essentially. They put him to like be the captain of this vessel, and everything's going good until one day where they find these giant pings on their radar, and they go digging, and it turns out to be these two sarcophagi, and one is huge and the other one's the size of a human, and there's a heartbeat in it.
A big human.
Big human, yeah.
Yeah, he's a large guy.
So then from that synopsis, you can kind of pretty much get the idea that this is where the doom starts kicking in, because they're gonna, the guy's gonna come out, and the big thing's gonna be a big bad guy. And it's and that's when I went through the editing stage, and when it hits the part where the monsters are starting to breach the I called it the land drill.
Right.
It is just a straight up action book from that.
It is.
There's like, it doesn't stop at all, and it just keeps going, and I'm like, perfect in my mind. I was like, that's perfect. And there were a few small complaints like in the beginning where it was like, oh, it doesn't, you don't get to learn about all the characters as much. And I'm like, that wasn't how Doom worked. Doom is about the action. You learn about the guy, not the people that are there with him. Like,
right.
It's just for blood and guts and gunfire and
gore,
like, gore, testosterone. Like, that's all it is. And that's what I wanted to get across with the book. And if I wanted to do it a different way and write in some of like the softer horror that I've done, I probably would have went into some more character study, but I just wanted an action book. Like every metal album's got to have that one track where it just rips the entire time. And there's like, they're like, what's a bridge? Screw it. We're just going to, it's just going to be the chorus for the entire damn song. Who cares?
There may not even be a chorus. We might just have like one killer riff that just destroys everything for.
Exactly. And and that's usually the one that tops the charts. So.
That's right. That's right. So maybe this is a ridiculous question to ask after that explanation, but is there a theme that runs through this thing besides just kick-ass action from basically start to finish? Because it does get right to moving pretty quickly.
I mean, I did have like a small theme that it's, if you pay really close attention to it, and I know it's there probably because I wrote it, obviously. Mm-hmm. I know some of the things that I want to interject, but I had the theme of like, even though it's all this action and there's all this stuff going on, that you kind of want to feel for the people that are in these positions of like major responsibility.
Right.
Because like you looked at the captain of the land drill, there was a couple moments where he would talk about like he heard somebody screaming, and it reminded him of like when he used to be able to go to theme parks. And he would hear like the kids on the roller coaster screaming and having a good fun time and everything. And like, he missed being able to just be what he considered a human, because he feels like he's not anymore. He's just a cog in the machine to get more of this stuff to send it down to Earth, so that people that are doing the thing that he just thought about can keep doing it, And then the Doom guy, I'll just call him Doom guy. I think I called him X in the book.
Yeah. But, Subject X, right?
Subject X, yeah. Like for him, it's he has to keep he has this mission to just get these things dead. Like they ruined his life, they made him into what he is, and he just he hates them for it. But at the same time, he also would like to have that humanity back. So I guess in a sense, like I tried to get a little bit of the idea of humanity put into the book, but it's very minuscule compared to all the action and stuff that's going on.
I was trying to count in my head how many times I've read the word gore because it's the title. So I'm like, it kept jumping out at me every time I'd see it. And it is a gory. I don't want to give any spoilers for those that haven't read it yet. But if you're looking for a quiet nighttime read, this is probably something you should hold off on until the morning. It's like, yeah. Although I do read it at night before I go to bed because I'm like, this is great. I'm like, I'm good with all that. But I did think last night as I was kind of wrapping the last 30%, I was like, if I end up having this crazy night because I'm reading this book right before I go to sleep, I'm going to have a real fun conversation with Matt tomorrow about this. I'm kind of hoping that it happens, but and I ended up doing my typical thing of just sleeping like a dead person. So,
well, I'm glad you got some sleep.
Yeah, it was great. So I was really intrigued. In fact, well, let me just add one more thing. I'm the kind of person that can read, close book, and go to sleep. Mm-hmm. If you're the kind of person that like your anxiety gets rolling or if your energy gets spun up or whatever, do not read this book before you go to bed because it is an action book and you'll be all wound up. You'll be like, great, now I can't fall asleep because I've got, this great action scene going on and I can't let go, I was in the military, so I learned how to sleep anywhere at any time.
Right. Yeah.
So it's like I can just go click out, and it works.
I envy that. I really do.
Dude.
I mean, like you had to go through some very, different circumstances with your life than I obviously have to, but I would love to just be like, sleep now, conk, I'm done.
My wife hates me because like I could take a 20-minute nap, 30-minute nap. And it's like I slept 5 hours, and she's just like, I don't know how you do that. If I lay down for 30 minutes, I'm a mess for the rest of the day. I'm like, just another reason for you to not like me. Joking. Although she would agree with me if she heard me say that. So, so like when you wrote the book, okay, now this is where my musician background kicks in and I get a little too antsy. What were you listening to when you wrote this book, man? Because do you listen to music when you write or?
See, here's the part that's going to be disappointing for you.
You don't listen to music when you write?
I don't listen to music when I write.
That's a thing.
I tried it at first with this because I was like, I writing what it's going to be. I'm like, I have to listen to metal. Like you can't like in my mind, I'm like, great. I'm going to put on a Doom soundtrack. I'm going to have Mick Gordon ripping riffs in my ears. Like this is going to be amazing. And I tried it and I got too distracted from the music that I couldn't. I was like, okay. So what I adopted with this, and I kind of am still doing it to this day. I go on YouTube and I find things, I believe they just call them like infinity rooms.
Yep.
So it's like you're at a cafe or something and it's just playing like background atmospheric music and like sounds and stuff. And I usually kind of put that in the background. So as I'm like writing about him ripping stuff in half and brains and blood going everywhere, there's like this soft jazz and rain pattering on a window in a cafe somewhere during the fall,
It's almost better. Well, I was thinking when I was reading it, and this is just, I'm showing my age a little bit here, but I was like, dude, Fear Factory would be perfect for this.
I love Fear Factory.
That
would be, and I had the idea. I'm like, I should make like a soundtrack for this, where I just like pull all the different things that would be incorporated for it. But it would be such a long soundtrack if I put all my favorites that would work for this.
Well, that's what I was thinking because it's got that industrial kind of feel, the high speed, but it's also kind of like they've got a really good groove.
Yeah.
So I was thinking if Matt tells me he was listening to Fear Factory, I'm gonna just jump out of my chair. Because that's what I had.
And I said that.
There you go. Well, you did. You thought it would be a good idea, so now I'm just gonna say that's it. That's what we did.
There you go.
So, I feel like the music that we listen to kind of sticks in our, like when we're writing, kind of sticks in our brain as part of the experience of writing that book, right? So like later on when you think back to when you were writing Gore, you're going to be thinking about those coffee shop kind of tunes going on.
It happened during editing. Like,
right?
Because I was like, oh yeah, I remember like, I believe I was in like the cafe from Twin Peaks when I was writing this, because I found one that was that, and I'm like, I put that on as I'm sitting there like doing edits and stuff.
Nice.
Yeah,
So were there any lyrics in that music at all, or was it all instrumental?
it was all just instrumental. Yeah.
It's actually really good for your brain when you're writing. I think like sometimes people just can't do lyrics while they're writing.
Yeah, well, that if I hear lyrics, I just want to sing along, and that then my wife will divorce me if I do that, and then everything will just go to hell. So.
Yeah, we can't have that. No lyrics, no lyrics, because lyrics equals divorce. That's not going to work.
Yeah.
So what? I mean, we talked about what inspired Gore, but
Mhm.
Gore is like book number over it. You've written over a dozen books at this point.
I think this is book 13.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's pretty
and I
awesome.
should know that number, and I'm answering it like a question, and
I'm so prolific, I can't remember all the books I've written. It's that kind of conversation. I love it. Well, like, did you have? So the book before Gore was the Backrooms, right?
yes,
What was your experience like writing Backrooms? It's like it sounds like it had to be completely different than Gore
the
because Gore
back
was
rooms went smooth as butter compared to Gore. Um, it was, and that idea for the back rooms was like, I think at the time when I had that idea, there was a YouTube short like kind of show that was going on. There was a guy who was making videos about the back rooms, which for those who aren't familiar, it's a creepy pasta about this place of never-ending corridors and weird constructions in this yellow like room of just buzzing halogen bulbs and all this weird stuff, and there's like things in it too that obviously want to kill you because it's horror, so why
why
they
not?
don't want to show up and be like, you want some tea, like. But yeah, we was watching those. I'm like, this is a fascinating idea. I'm like, I wonder how it would be to write it from a prose of it being like letters that somebody who's trapped in there is leaving behind, and you're the new person that just wound up in this place.
Nice.
And you're just finding these letters as the book continues, and then you're learning their journey and what they're doing to possibly get out of it.
Okay.
And that's basically how I want it. It's like a series of letters, and it actually has coding in it.
Like
And
computer coding?
yeah, because I was like the person that was trapped in there. Her name's Oleander. She actually comes along around like the third letter or something. You start with a guy named Greg, and if you haven't read the book, it's fine. This doesn't spoil that much for you. Greg doesn't do so well, and then Oleander takes over for the letter writing, and she's a programmer, and she's basically using the knowledge she has to try and figure out a way to write a gateway out, because as she's been in there, she just realizes everything is basically just a program. The world as we know it is gone, and this was all put like there was a program, and this is where it kind of is adjacent with the Matrix a little bit. Like the world that we know is all a program. Our consciousness is just in these algorithms that keep us doing our everyday jobs as we did before everything went to shit, which I blamed on the Y2K bug.
We're in our 40s, so
Yeah. For the youngins out there, they're like, what the hell is that? I'm like, at one point in time, we thought when the clock rolled over to 00 for the year, everything was going to go to hell.
yeah, they really did.
Yeah. We thought we were going to be like, cooking over fires and beating like, wildlife with bones. Like,
I was in Trinidad when that happened, and
yeah.
I remember being down there and being like, all right, so what do we do if all the things people are panicking about actually happen? Do we leave? Do we stay? Like, because we're on a ship. Like, can we get out of here?
I don't know why, like when that happened, like that New Year, when I woke up after like, because I fell asleep before it even turned over. I think I worked like, I was working in the kitchen at that time, and I think I worked like a 14 or 15 hour shift. I was just dead. And I went home and just went to bed. And I'm like, whatever happens, I'll deal with it in the morning. I don't know what's going to happen with this. But I don't know why. Like I woke up and I expected it to be like the future, like I don't know why, like everything was going to be like in chrome or something. I don't know what I was expecting, but like I look out the window and I'm just like, huh, it's all the same.
Dude, that is hilarious. Like, did you have like this moment of like you just don't want to open the front door? Or you're like just kind of waiting like hesitantly.
Well, I kind of was. I was like, well, what if everything did go to hell? But then I live in a very rural area. I have a house like by the river, and my nearest neighbor is like a half a mile on each side of my house. So if there was something going wrong, I wouldn't know audibly. So I'd have to like drive like 5 minutes into town and then be like, oh shit, go back home.
So are you in the Northeast, right?
Yes.
Gotcha. And so did you live in that same area during all this that you live in now?
Yeah.
Perfect.
I literally moved 2 houses down from the house I grew up in.
Well, you know, that could be a big deal. Like if you live in a city and you move a mile away, it's like a big jump. So
Yeah.
you 2 houses down, half a mile to each neighbor, you're good to go.
Yeah.
You're good to go.
It works, you know. It's a nice quiet area, and I love it a lot. So I was like, I can't see myself moving into anything that's an apartment or like the city or even like a suburb. I have to have this quiet.
Right.
And luckily enough for me, when the time was right, there was a house that, you know, was just there and it was affordable, and I went for it.
Good for
Did that instead of doing a college loan. So I don't know what would the pay, you know, if the scales were even with that, but you know,
something tells me you made the right decision. Just based on how things are going with
the house is paid off, so I guess I did.
Good for you, man. So when did you start writing? Like how many years ago did you start writing?
Oh my, so if we want to say like when I started writing, it was in high school.
Okay.
I had this weird idea in my head for some like I guess it'd be like a sci-fi, but it also had like religious tones put in there, which at the time, and this isn't to ruffle anybody's feathers. At the time, I was religious in high school. I'm really not anymore.
Okay.
But yeah, I wanted to write this story about like this family basically gives birth to the second coming of Jesus, because at the time that was a big thing, because like 2000s, yeah, and that's the thing, you got to put yourself in that headspace. The 2000s were coming.
Yeah.
And one of the things was, it was either going to be the computers were going to ruin everything, or the other thing was Jesus was actually going to come back down from heaven, and then I guess he was going to ruin everything. There was like that whole apocalyptic thing with religion involved at that time. I didn't quite understand it, even being Catholic at the time. I was like, well, wait, why would he do that? Like
why now?
Yeah. I guess he was just like, he's like, man, the millennium, baby.
Yeah. He wanted he wanted a piece of the millennium action too.
Yeah.
Millennium.
So yeah, like it was in high school. I started dabbling with the stuff, and you know, then girls became a thing, and a lot of hobbies usually kind of changed to just, you know, your focus on just girls. And then you know, work became a thing, and it went away for a very long time. And I think it was around, I can't even put a year on it. I'll just say I started doing podcasting. And then I was working in a comic book store in York, PA, which is the area that which I reside in. And the owners there knew a guy named Brian Keene.
Oh.
And they're like, hey, you should have him on your podcast. And I did, and we got along. And then he had me on his podcast. And then we were talking about writing, and I told him this one idea I had, and he's like, you should write that stuff. Like, you have good ideas. And then I said, okay, fuck it. I'll just start writing again.
Why not?
And, you know, that's when it basically all started. So it was probably like, you know, like 2010 area, possibly, when that started picking back up again. No, not 2010. It'd be way later than that. Sorry. I suck with time. All your listeners are going to realize that as we keep talking.
That's all right.
I suck with dates. Whenever I have to fill out a part on an application where it's like, you know, when was the time period you worked at this place? And I'm just like, between here and there, possibly. I don't know.
Well, don't ever file for a security clearance with the government, because it's like this SF-86 form. They're like, you know, we want the exact month and year of every house you've ever lived in your entire life. You're like, really? You've moved me every 3 years for 22 years. How am I supposed to know?
That's not cool. I would never be able to do that.
It's like, is this a joke? No, they're not joking. They're serious.
That'd be one of those surprise things. They're like, surprise quiz. You should have been paying attention to this the whole time.
Yeah. You should have known where you lived. Yeah, that's crazy. So I didn't know that you knew Brian before this.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
pretty cool.
I was even on the horror show for a little while, and then that ended, and then Mary Sangiovanni and I were talking in the background. We're like, hey, it was still fun. We should do another podcast. And then we called our friend Somer Canon. We got her in on the fun, and then we started that. We started the Ghostwriters podcast, and that show was we didn't really know what we were doing with it at first because we
I
wanted
know
to
the
do like
feeling.
yeah. Well, we had the intention. We're like, we want to give writing advice because if you are a new writer and you go online and you Google like oh, how do I do this,
Yeah.
and you just get like a general wiki how where it's like 3 pictures and it's like write book, send book, success, and it's like, oh, cool, it's that easy. But as the episodes went on, we were like, we're kind of running out of stuff to talk about as far as writing advice is going. And in the background, though, one constant that kept going on was we kept talking about bad horror films. So that eventually just became what it is today, where we pick a movie, like one of us picks a movie, and then we watch it and we talk about it. But we critique it in a way where we try to present to an author what they did wrong from a technical standpoint and how you can either dodge that or correct it if you find yourself in the same situation.
Right. And this is the Ghostwriters podcast.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's what we do with that show. I had another podcast called Grindcast that ended in June of this year.
Gotcha.
That was going on for 8 years. We ended on our 500th episode.
Wow.
Yeah. Oh, we won guns ablaze in the beginning. It was 2 episodes a week. We did YouTube. We did Let's Plays. Like we did everything. And I almost killed myself because it was way too much work.
It's a lot of work.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm on a 1 episode a week pace, and that's all I can really manage with this show because I've got another 2 podcasts I do for the nonfiction side.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah,
it's a lot.
It's a lot.
Yep. But Grindcast is going to come back though for Halloween because we do a thing called Spooktober Cinema. Much like akin to Ghostwriters podcast, for this spectacular, we watch shitty movies and then we talk about the shitty movie that we watched.
What's the shitty movie selection process like?
Well, we start off with because there's 3 of us in the show, so we start off with each one of us picks a movie for an episode. So there'll be 3 that we pick, and usually we try to leave 3 open for listeners to pick for us to watch.
Oh,
some years they've been very kind, the listeners. Other years not so much. Last year we watched Ernest Scared Stupid, and I'm like, this is my favorite Halloween movie of all time. So you're not phasing me.
Wait a minute. So Ernest Scared Stupid was one of the selections?
Yeah.
That was voted on by the listeners.
Yep, that was one of the listener suggestions for us to pick.
Oh my gosh.
I'm like, how can I turn that down? It's a fantastic movie.
So I was going to ask, my next question was going to be, just because you got my wheels spinning when you started talking about you watch shitty movies, I'm thinking, is this a contest where they're like, all right, rate the worst horror movies, and then whichever ones get the worst ratings, so the ones you end up having to watch?
No, we haven't done a rating thing. I between the 3 of us on the show, I think we start getting a bravado between us where we're like, yeah, who's going to be the worst out of us this year? And Jason, he usually tries to be nice because I think secretly he doesn't like watching bad movies. I don't think he finds a fun in it. So the one year he said, we're going to watch Perfect Blue, the anime. And I'm like, this is a fantastic movie. It's well written, drawn, acted, everything. What am I going to complain about for an hour and a half?
He's doing you no favors.
No. So because he did that, then I'm like, fine, I'm going to pull one out of here and we're just going to watch the 4th Crow movie. And he's like, what? Oh. I'm like, yeah, there was a 4th one.
I had no idea.
You didn't even know this.
No, not a clue.
Yeah, it stars Eddie Furlong as the Crow.
Really?
And David Boreanaz is the bad guy.
Edward Furlong is in that movie.
Yeah. And Tara Reid's in the movie as well.
What?
Yeah.
What year? Well, I was going to ask you what year it was
Don't
made.
ask me the year. It was in the 2000s.
Okay. After American History X.
Yeah.
Well, after American
that.
History.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
It's I mean, if you want to have a textbook example as to how you completely tank a franchise that was kind of already on its decline with even the second film, like watch the Crow Wicked Prayer. It's god awful. It is quite possibly one of the worst movies I've ever watched in my life.
Wow.
It's in the top 5 because it's nothing that any of the other movies did.
Dude, you've got me looking now. I don't know why I'm even looking this up right now.
Oh my god,
it's going to be that
probably
bad.
Rent it for like a quarter. Like it's
so. Oh my god!
And because I am the person I am, I was like, well, if we're gonna watch this, I need physical media, so I bought an actual copy of it.
Oh my god, 2005.
Yeah, 2005. So yeah, if the world ends and my house doesn't get hurt in the whatever cataclysm is going to happen, we will be okay because I will still have a usable copy for our society of the Crow Wicked Prayer.
That is your contribution to the world in its next phase.
I'm archiving every important film we can have.
Oh, it's so bad, man. So, now you got me all types of. I've got so many questions spinning in my head. You've got to give me at least one good 80s, like, because to me, like, we were just talking about like the Killer VHS series from Shortwave Publishing right before we came on. Which, by the way, the listeners are they're probably ready to throttle me. They've had to hear about this for the last few episodes because I'm like, have you seen it? Have you seen it? And it's really great. So, but
it is
the reason why I think it's so cool is because I was a kid of the 80s and a teenager of the 90s. And so in the 80s, like the blockbuster weekend experience.
Oh yeah.
Sometimes we got the worst freaking movies because they look like the worst movie and we knew it was going to be hilarious, you know? So like if you had one movie to archive from like the late 80s, that was just like the worst horror movie, which one would you drag in with you?
Oh God.
There's so many.
There are so many. And I would probably have to pick, because I will say I'm probably not also the only other person that's going to throw a vote in this hat in this hypothetical situation that we have going.
Right.
I'd probably have to pick a movie from my favorite horror franchise ever, and it would be one of the later Friday the 13th films.
Yeah.
I think part 8 was in the late 80s, the one where he takes Canada. It's supposed to be Manhattan, but they shot it in Canada.
It's ridiculous.
I think it was in the late 80s. That movie is just like and don't get me wrong, I will watch every Friday the 13th movie with a big smile on my face, no matter how shitty it is, just because I love it.
You're not allowed
the absurdity of it.
You're not allowed to beat yourself up about dates anymore, dude. You couldn't have picked a better like time. It was 89, man. I said late 80s.
There we go.
You pulled the movie right out. Look at you.
But yeah, that movie is ridiculous. It takes forever to get going. It's more Jason on a boat than it is in Manhattan. And he has like teleportation powers in this film. Like there's a part in this movie where a guy's running away from him and he's going up a ship's it's the mast.
Yeah.
Like he's climbing up that. The previous shot before that, Jason walks in the scene and he's at the bottom, like looking up at the guy. They go to the guy climbing on the ladder. It's like 5 seconds later. Jason's right on him and then throws him off from the top of the pier and the mast. And I'm like, how the hell did he get up there? Like,
Jason.
It's the guy who walks, he can scale buildings in a nanosecond.
Yeah. That's crazy.
It's just, yeah. And all the kills are really lame. And it's just one of those things where there's only one scene that anybody ever remembers from it. And it's when he's fighting the kid on the top of the roof and they're boxing. And the kid's like he's going all out. And then Jason just uppercuts his head off into a trash can.
So Tyson-esque.
Yeah.
I love it. So his head, not only does he knock his head off, like physically removes his head from his body with his fist, but then it goes into a trash can.
Yep. It falls off the building, rolls into a dumpster, and then the dumpster lid closes.
Perfect bag shot.
Yeah. Couldn't do it any better. Jordan was probably jealous at the time.
Yeah. The guy was in the Chicago. He was all geared up to play with Chicago, man.
You should have. They should have had Jason come in and play a game for the Bulls, and that.
He would have been perfect.
Yeah.
So you kind of talked about writing as a teen, and you're talking about these movies. You know, obviously you have a passion for these movies. How much of an influence were these movies on your desire to be a writer? Like, did you feel like that was a way you could kind of express that artistic influence you had going?
Oh yeah, like a lot of the movies I watched back then, they 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 gave me ideas, maybe not great ideas,
Mm-hmm.
because I still have this fear as an adult where I am just a slightly above average functioning person on the scale of like mental acuity, and then everybody's just nice to me, so I don't think that I'm stupid or something. But it was even worse back then because I come up with ideas, and I had friends that weren't really into reading.
Yeah.
So I'd be like, oh, well, wouldn't it be cool if they did this or whatever? And they're like, just shut up and watch the movie. Like, you're ruining this. I'm like, oh, okay. All right. Sorry.
Nice.
But yeah, I had written a Crow book, kind of. I didn't get the whole way through. It was, I had the idea and I wrote the first like maybe 30 or 40 pages of it, because at that time, every Crow movie was exactly the same.
Right.
You got a guy, something bad happens to him, he dies, the crow brings him back, and he's just like, oh, haha, you can't kill me. And then somebody's like, oh, yeah, kill the crow. And he's like, oh, no, now what do I do? My idea was that something does happen, but it's not because of gang violence or anything like that. It's a natural death. And he dies with his wife, and he in the afterlife, he finds out that his son was inside of his wife. Like, they didn't get tested or anything. It was very early on. And he's brought back to then try and actually relive the life that he lost. But there was like amnesia in there, and he had to like piece things together to like reform the life that he had. And by piecing it together, it wasn't like solving a puzzle thing. It was, in the book, there was like an ethereal world where he would have to go and find shards of stuff that looked like glass to piece like mirrors together that would show him his old life. Yeah. So
how old were you when you did this?
I think I was like 14.
Sweet.
Yeah.
Were you taking like any creative writing classes or anything?
Absolutely not. No.
No. Yeah.
And my parents actually had like because it was the one time I think they actually nurtured the idea of me writing, because it was just, I think to them, they didn't think I was going to take it seriously, but they were like, it would be cool, like if you had like your own little typewriter. So like we went yard sailing, and it just so happened there was this house that had this old typewriter, and it still worked. And I was there typing this thing up on that typewriter.
Serious?
And
was it like an electric typewriter?
no, it was just the old fashioned one. Like, it goes across, it dings, and you got to push it over. And
Sweet.
yeah, and it was fun for a while until it started becoming a chore writing with that versus just using my computer.
Yeah, there's a lot of work that goes into typing on a mechanical.
It is, and you got to
typewriter.
do like the pointer finger thing, because like all the keys are spread so far apart, you can miss easily, and then you like cut your finger on that stuff. And
And if you're like me, you type faster than you're supposed to. Like, your brain and your fingers aren't paced right, and it's a nightmare on a mechanical keyboard or a mechanical typewriter because of erasing. Like, it
doesn't exist.
yeah, it's like a thing, like I would have never made it back then.
Yep. And that's what I remember, how like all the mistakes, and I would just have to go in with like either whiteout, or I would just scribble it out with a red pen, and it was like, man, well, how the hell do I make this actually look good?
Nice.
If I want to finalize manuscript?
Word processing. Yay.
Yeah, and that's why I just like look over the computer. It's like, well, that has a delete key, so that alone is an advancement compared to that.
Yeah, big time. So we've heard that you were influenced by movies at that time in your life. What about? I mean, obviously you were reading a lot. What kind of books were you reading? What got you into writing suspenseful fiction, whether it be horror or sci-fi with a horror bend or whatever?
Well, the first things I ever read in my life were scary stories to tell in the dark.
Yeah, it's so good.
I feel like that's a gateway book for everybody.
It really
When
was.
they get into the horror genre, especially. Like,
Yeah.
and I know it's kind of split right down the middle. It's either 50-50, you were a Goosebumps or you were a Scary Stories person.
Yeah, I was
I
a Scary
started with
Stories
Scary.
kid.
Yeah, you were a Scary Stories
Yeah,
kid too.
yeah.
I started there, and then I moved over into Goosebumps too, because obviously there were a lot more Goosebumps books to digest than there were Scary Stories. But my God, that art,
It was
you
so
will never
good.
forget the art. Like,
It's
you
still
might,
to this day is
yeah.
gripping.
I wish, and I don't know if there's anywhere that has them or if they ever go up for sale or any. I'd love to get original prints
Oh my God.
from that and frame it, because it's just amazing art. No one, well, I can't say no one draws like him. There are
Right.
a bevy of people out there now that
Sure.
reproduce the style, but at that time, growing up, there was nothing else out like that.
I remember being shocked that it was where it was. I think I first saw it at school,
Yeah,
and I remember opening that book and being like, "This isn't supposed to be here." Like if they
I had that
find
same
out about
feeling.
these pictures.
Yeah, I had the same feeling. I went to a private school, like it was Roman Catholic, and this was in the library of that school. And like I pull it out, I'm like, Scary Stories. I'm like, oh, it's a kid book, you know. And I open it up, I'm like, holy, like looking around, like they know this is in here.
See, I went to public school.
Yeah.
That's crazy. Okay, I never got to Goosebumps when I was a kid. You
Okay.
know,
Goosebumps is really fun. Like it's, it's obviously not. I on a ratio scary. It's not anywhere near. I think is like scary wise as Scary Stories was.
right?
But they were just really fun books. Like I read a scary story. I mean, I read a Goosebump book, and I always feel like it's like October, it's Halloween. It
Cool.
has that vibe. It's like that kooky, spooky kind of vibe to it.
That's cool, man.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
So those are what I started out with, and then
What happened after that?
I see a bunch of his books behind you. Mr.
Stephen
came
King.
along.
Yeah.
Yeah. The first book I read of his was Cujo. I was still in private school at the time, so still Roman Catholic school. I did a book report on Cujo, much to the chagrin of my English teacher.
Was it a sister?
No, actually, I missed that cutoff when they stopped having like nuns teach.
Right.
So it was just regular teachers at that time. I probably thankfully for me that happened, because before the school even started, I heard all the horror stories of the nuns,
they were brutal, man.
They were, and I was just like, no, I want to have fun in school.
Yeah.
So yeah, I did that book report, and it was one of those things like, well, why couldn't you just read like a classic or something? Like, what's wrong with Treasure Island?
Yeah, I was a huge fan of Stephen King very early, like so many people are.
Yeah.
But my getting there was a little different, because my mom was like, if you're old enough to ask, you're old enough to know kind of person.
Mm-hmm.
So I was like watching these crazy movies, the gorier, the better. It was like so much fun. I think between the age of like 11 and or like maybe even 10 and 14, that was like the best, was watching, all the B horror flicks. And
Oh yeah.
And I remember Pet Sematary scared the hell out of me.
Oh yeah.
And I was like,
that was a good one. The sequel was the sequel was amazing as well.
I haven't seen the sequel. After the first one, I was like, I can't watch another one because it'll be ruined for me. In fact, I won't watch the original movie now because I'm worried it won't be good anymore, and I'll be like all pissed off because I ruined it for myself. So in my mind, Zelda's the craziest thing ever.
Okay. I mean,
you're
still not wrong. I mean, that scene's still like, what the hell?
Dude, yeah. I freaked me out when I was a kid, and then Misery came along, which by all accounts was more realistic, but obviously way different than Pet Sematary. And
Misery was frightening just because it's like that could happen.
Yeah.
It easily could happen. People are that unhinged, and there are some people that are readers that are that attached to the books that you write.
Right. And coincidentally, I can't figure out if it's the first book I read of King's or if it's in the first three. But The Gunslinger was actually given to me by my best friend's mom.
Mm-hmm.
And she was like, hey, if he likes scary stuff, this guy writes scary books, and gave me a paperback copy of The Gunslinger.
Yeah.
and I was hooked. I was like, oh my God, this is so good. And
Yeah.
then my grandma was like, well, get him the Eyes of the Dragon because it doesn't have any bad stuff in it.
Yeah, man. The Gunslinger is like chef's kiss. That's an amazing book. And like
Yeah.
that whole, I loved the whole Dark Tower series, but I've never come across a series where the first book as strong and as inviting as the Gunslinger was for that series.
See, I feel that way, but there's a lot of people that don't. They think that it wasn't, on par with what it could be. I'm like, man, it's great. Like, I was going to share it with my son, but I was a little worried about this.
Well, there always is that meat in the middle, because
Yeah.
I'm one of those people that the second book I was like, oh God, I wish I didn't I wish this didn't exist.
Are you talking about the drawing of the three?
Yeah.
I could,
The
dude, that
second
was,
book, I was like, we were on this beach for 500 pages.
I felt the same way, man. I mean,
don't get me wrong, it was written beautifully.
Yeah.
The idea is extremely interesting of how he got these different characters together, but I was just like, oh my God, I went nowhere.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I got through the book and I was like, okay, next. Like, I
Yeah.
wasn't lingering. Wizard and Glass is my favorite of the
That's
series.
a very good one as well. Yeah.
And I've recently gone back and revisited Wolves of the Kala. Because I remember when I originally read it, I was like, yeah, this is good, but it's, I just I think I still had a little bit of a hangover from Wizard and Glass, and I was like, is it as good as it could be? I don't know. And now I went back and listened to it. I'm like, okay, it's been better this second time. I just got it on audiobook this time because I didn't have enough, bandwidth to sit down and read the book again.
Well, that's what I got to start doing for these thicker books. I don't have the time to open a book and read it. Plus, there's like tiny hands that want to rip the pages out of the book. So yeah, I got to do audio, man. Like,
yeah. Well, I had gotten an Audible subscription, and I think I had like 3 or 4 books. I had to make a decision because he was finishing the Dark Tower series while I was deployed. Like, he'd put out like all these books toward the latter part of the series, and I wasn't in the United States, and I didn't want to ruin my experience with the book by forgetting so much since I'd last read them, because I was reading them as they came out. So like so many other people, I've been reading them over years, and I'm like, nope, I have so much respect for this series that I know I have to go back and revisit all these books again before I can continue. So I thought, well, how the hell do I do that? Like, I barely have enough time to sit down and read it as it is. And I'm like, I'm getting all those freaking books on audiobook now. So like, I started stacking them one every month for like, forever. And I built up the first, well, except for the Gunslinger. I did reread the Gunslinger again because I wanted to go back to where it started with the book.
Yeah. It's so good, man.
Yeah, it was so good. I'm with you. You can, I respect the drawing of the 3, but I'm not going back.
Right. Yeah, I'd probably skip that because I know where it goes.
I mean, and it's really important, the stuff that's in there. I mean, second time I went through it, I had a better appreciation for it, but it was still a lot.
I always also, when I meet another King reader, I like to recommend Under the Dome if you haven't read it.
Yep, very good.
You have? Okay, excellent.
Yep.
That's in my top 5 books of his.
It's very good.
Yeah, that book came along at a very busy time of my life, and I'm like looking at this, I'm like, these are the types of books I used to use when I was a kid to reach the top shelf. I'd stack them on the floor so I could reach the counter, and I'm like, how the hell is it? How am I ever going to get through this? But it was just pages at a time, and
yep,
I'm so glad I did. That was one of the best books of his that I read during like that 2000s time, because like before that book hit, a lot of people were like, oh, he lost his magic. I don't really know, if he can really do this that well anymore. And that book, I'm like, no, he still knows how to pull it together. Like, I felt like I lived in this town. Like, I knew all these people and the weird stuff the one guy's son was into. And
yeah. So did you read Duma Key?
That one I have to get an audiobook for. I haven't got to read that yet.
You've got to read that book. It's really good. I think it's one of those like discussed, underrated King books. I think Duma Key stood. I mean, it didn't feel like a full on King book at first, until the guy gets where he's going in the keys and things start to happen. But so I could have, the beginning of the story was a little frustrating for me, but afterward, I was like, dude, that was a really good book. It's a great summer read. So if you're going to read Duma Key or listen to it, summertime's great because it's set in the Florida Keys and you kind of get this like Caribbean
Oh, cool.
feel to it. I really enjoyed it. In fact, I made a post on, do I have to call it X, Twitter, whatever? Like, I posted on there a couple of weeks back that I thought that was like one of the most underrated King books, and I almost got no responses on my post. I was like, yeah, maybe my statement stands so true right now. But I remember reading like Gerald's Game, Rose Matter,
Yep.
all of them right back to back to back as they were all coming out. Same cover design series, like a issue from the publisher and everything at the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was with you, man.
It was a good time to grow up like reading horror, honestly, because
Yeah,
there was a lot out there. Like in major bookstores, I feel like when I was growing up in the 90s, horror was more prevalent in the bookstores than it is today. Because like now some places are just like, oh, here's our bookshelf of
Right.
horror. It's just King and Kuntz. So,
right.
if you can find something else in there, whatever.
And anyone who wrote with them.
Right, exactly. Like, oh, there's a Straub in there. There you go.
There's the Talisman.
Yeah, there's the Talisman. We have one copy of Ghost Story over here, if that's your thing. And that's another one of those things. I feel so bad for that like Ghost Story. I love that book, but that's another one that I don't hear many people often mention when they talk about like their top 5 or top 10 horror stories of all time. And that is an amazing. I read it like every like Christmas, December, because it's like they all get together during like a snowstorm and they're telling these ghost stories and everything. And I'm like, this is awesome.
I don't know that I read that.
Yeah, you should read it. It's really good.
All right. I mean, I've seen it. I don't think I've read it because that was published back in the 90s, right?
I think it was published even before then, I believe.
Okay. I may have read it. I mean, it was 30 years.
And again,
ago.
I want to say I'm bad with dates, so please don't anybody get at
I don't know. You say that, but then then you pull Jason or Friday the 13th Part 8 out of your back pocket. Hey, it's 89, man. I got it. So just to kind of recap the wonderful launch of Gore, before we move on and give you your life back with your young one that you have to chase down somewhere before your wife kills you. What's coming on the horizon for Gore? Do you have promos? Are you doing anything special for it? Is there anything really cool happening in the Gore world?
Right now, I have on hand physical copies that I'm selling signed editions of. If anybody's interested in,
very cool.
You can reach out. I'm on like a lot of all the social media platforms, but I don't want to bore you by telling you all my different handles to every single like one there is out there. So I guess the easiest one to hit me at would be the platform formerly known as Twitter. I'm at Matt_Wildasin on there if you're interested in grabbing one of those books. I've been posting it every day. I'm sure I'm annoying the hell out of people with that post, but you gotta put your stuff out there.
Dude, if you're not going to brag about your book, no one else is.
Yeah. I mean, don't, and that's for anybody who's listening to this who might just be starting out. That's one thing I usually always stress. Like, it's something you've poured your heart and soul into.
Yep. Don't
worry if you think you're going to annoy other people by shouting to the rooftops to the world that you've got this book. Don't tell us. Everyone does want to know. It's just the algorithms are so shitty that not everybody's going to see it. And that's kind of how it works right now. I have faith that at some point in time, one of the ships is going to right, and we're going to all be able to finally see things from each other again.
Yeah. I mean, Threads has been pretty nice. I'm a big fan of what Substack stands for, I guess you could say. And I've really been active on trying to build a little bit of a following and publish stuff exclusively to Substack before I go to print. Like I've done a pre-edited version of my upcoming novella in a weekly series on Substack.
Oh,
and then
cool.
and then when I go to print, it comes off Substack so I can go on KU, so I can go on Kindle Unlimited. You can keep up to 10% of your work off of Kindle Unlimited. So I'll probably keep chapter 1 on Substack and just point to Kindle from there. just to keep it there and alive, so people aren't like, dude, you just ripped the whole story off. Like, but you
Hey,
know,
that's a good marketing tip for people too.
there
That's
you
a
go.
really good idea.
Yeah. So that's one way to do that. But I'm with you, man. I tell a lot of my clients that come to me on my work side are coming to me to convert their books into courses and that type of thing. Nonfiction authors. I don't care if you're talking fiction or nonfiction. Oftentimes that they have the same blocks and barriers,
Yeah.
and I had to tell a client the other day, like, hey, look, my mentor, Honore Quarter, taught me that you should be proud of the work you produced. And it's not that you're pushing something on people they don't want. You know your book's going to help somebody. So could you imagine
Right.
the disservice you're going to do to them when you don't give them a really good story, or you don't give them something that could change their life, in the nonfiction world. And maybe that's like that. Maybe that becomes the book that some kid reads that ends up influencing them to become a writer in the future. You never
Right.
know, man.
Yeah,
So if
you
you're not
never
out there
know.
pushing it, it's never going to get pushed. You got to do it. So.
Yeah. Absolutely. I 100% co-sign with that.
Awesome, dude. Well, Matt, you told us where we can find you. You told us what's coming down the pipe. I'm excited to see what comes later, post Gore, in the future when you're publishing in a different space.
Well, you won't have to wait long.
Really,
I plan on,
when's your next release?
hopefully for October, I'm going to have a short story collection out there. I have a series I call the Horrors Untold series. This is going to be volume 6. Hopefully will be out in October. And I say hopefully just because I gave a date for Gore initially and I had to kick it back. So
Right.
like, projected for October. I always love getting something out there in October just because it's spooky season. You got to
Yeah.
get a book out.
Absolutely. Well,
Yeah.
we're going to task everyone that's listening to this with being an accountability buddy. If you don't see Matt's book
Yeah.
by October 20th, start hitting him up.
Yeah, harass the hell out of me.
There you go. So this way I don't feel bad when I'm the only one reaching out to you. Hey, where's the book, man? Well, Matt, thank you so much for taking the time out of your extremely busy day. I know this is time away from your young family, and I appreciate that effort, and you making the time to meet with us and share such a cool path to becoming a writer and all the stuff you're doing. I mean, I love it, man. It's been great, and hopefully I'll be able to talk to you again here in October when your next book's coming out, and we can brag about that one next.
I would absolutely love that. And I want to thank you for being so gracious to have me on. Like we talked a little bit before we hit record that, when you want to try and get on podcasts and you just cast that net out of being like, hey, anybody want to talk to me? And most of the time it's crickets, but you jumped in there and you're like, I would love to have you on. And that means the world to me because that doesn't happen often. So, and I had a great time on this show, man. Like this was fantastic.
Dude, I appreciate that. You just made my whole day. And I got a copy back of my book today from my editor, and this just made my day. It's like, I was already on a good note before I got here, but hearing that, man, you just like lifted me right up. So
No, well, you did the same for me today, my friend.
appreciate you, brother. Guys, you go check out Matt. I mean, you could tell that what he's doing is fun. It's exciting. It's entertaining. Gore's been great. You get out there, pick up his stuff, check him out, connect with him on all the socials, and let's keep this thing going, man. All right, Matt, we'll talk to you soon, buddy. Thank you so much.
Hey, thank you.